In this presentation, we will continue with part 2, continue looking through the company information and preferences, which you would generally want to be looking through after you first set up your QuickBooks Online account. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. Remember, we are in Get Great Guitars file. We're actually setting up a new account from scratch. We're not in the test drive file, although you can look at these preferences within the test drive file or your company file. But we do recommend and think it would be best if you can get your own fresh QuickBooks file at this point in time into the information along with us for practice purposes. We're going to go back up top. We're going to go to the cog in the upper right. So we're going to the cog in the upper right. We're going to go in under your account. We're looking at the account and settings. We're taking a look at the account and settings. Last time we looked at the company information and the billing and subscription tabs. Now we're going to go down to the usage. So we're going to be in the usage tab. These are your usage limits for QuickBooks Online Plus. Need more information, you can find it here. So this is where you're going to have your limits. I'm going to select this item just to review the limits. So if you scroll down, you'll basically get to this limits information. So QuickBooks Online plan limits. Now you want to be careful with these because if you're going to go over some of these limits, then it might be the case that QuickBooks doesn't really stop you at first, and then basically later on they may say, hey, now you're over your limits, and you'll have to basically make some type of change or increase at that point. So the limits look something like this. If you're using classes and locations, we'll talk a little bit about class tracking and classes in the future, but that's more of a kind of advanced feature. But even if you're using the plus, then you got 40, which you would typically be okay. If you're advanced, then you'd have no limit. Chart of accounts, we have the 250, and then if it's advanced, you have the no limit. Billable users, we have within plus, we've got the 5. Advanced has the 25, and then other user types. So if we talk about the accountant, then we have 2 generally, advanced 3, and reports only, and time tracking. So those are going to be that information there. I'm going to close this back out. And then I'm going to go to the sales. The sales tab starts with the customize. Customize the way forms look to your customers. Now the forms that you're typically going to give to the customers are going to be things like invoices and sales receipts. So you can give them a custom look and feel. We're going to go through and we're going to concentrate more on the data input, setting up the data input. We may go into the customization features later, but if you want to look into them now, you can go to the customize look and feel here. You could choose the form that you would like to look into to customize, for example, an invoice, and then you can go through the customization options related to it. For now, I'm going to close this back out, and I'm going to close without saving the customization. I'm going to go back to the lists, and then back up to our cog up top. We're going to go to the accounting and settings once again. And then on the left-hand side, we're looking at the sales tab. So the next item in the sales tab is the sales form content. So if we select the little pencil up top again, we have the editing field. Now, obviously, anytime you see this little question mark, it's going to give you the information, little added information about any of these options. So we have the preferred invoice terms. So these are going to be the terms, like when is the invoice going to be due by. So we're going to send out an invoice that says the company, someone has to bill it. We did work. We sent out an invoice to bill to the client. And then we want to know how long we expect for that invoice to be returned, when's basically the due date that we expect it returned by. We have the preferred delivery method, which would include the print later, send later, or none. We're going to keep the default as none. We have the shipping information, adds shipping fields, date, tracking, number, destination, subtotal to sales forms, related settings. So I'm going to keep that here now. We're going to keep the default and have the shipping off. Then we have the custom fields. Custom fields adds extra fields to sales forms. So like the invoice and the sales receipt, if you want to have an extra field within them. Select internal to show the field in QuickBooks. Select public to show the field on customer forms. So in other words, if we want to add a field to an invoice or a sales receipt, we can add the custom field here and make it either internal or public. Then we have the information down below. Custom transaction numbers, and if we select lets you view the change your transaction number, we've got the service date. Adds a service date field if you need to track the date a service was performed separately from the invoice date. So in other words, if we're making an invoice and there was a service date, we did the work on this date, and we made the invoice on a later date, then you might want to track both of those dates rather than just having the date it was made on the invoice. We're going to keep the default and not have that. Then we have a discount. adds a discount field to invoices and other sales forms like sales receipts. So a discount, if we want that field on there, if we want to say, hey, this is the price on the invoice or the sales receipt, and then we added a discount, which would basically reduce the price. So we would have to add that field into the invoice. And then we have the deposit, adds a deposit field to invoices so you can subtract customer deposit from the total to calculate the balance due. So if we need another field in this case for a deposit, they already have a deposit. So we're going to say, hey, here's the invoice. Here's how much you owe for this service. You've already given us the deposit. We may need the deposit field. Now you can go back into these settings. We may do so in the future as we go through the problem. Then we have the tips. Adds a tips field to the sales receipt. So again, adding a tip field to the form, to basically the sales receipt form. We're going to keep the default settings as off here on those and on for the custom transaction numbers. Then I'm going to save. We're now in the product and services. So I'm going to go ahead and select the pencil within the product and services. We're going to keep the default settings here, and this is what we want to have. So we want to show product service column on the sales form. So on the invoice and the sales receipt, we want to show the products that we're serving. We're not just going to say, hey, here's the invoice with a number on it. We're going to show the actual products and services, which are going to be items that we're going to have to set up in the system, which will help us to populate the invoices and help us to basically come up with the pricing and track the inventory for them. Turn on price rules. I'm going to keep the default as off at this point. We have the track quantity and price rates. We do want to track the quantity and price rates and track inventory quantity on hand. The inventory is one of the major things, while you need the kind of like the pro as the minimum of the QuickBooks level that you would pay for, so that you have basically that inventory tracking. So if that's something you need, that's what we're going to be practicing with here, and we want to take a look at how that basically inventory tracking would be handled. It does add a level of difficulty. So I'm going to save those. Those look good. Then we have the late fees. I'm going to go ahead and select the pencil on the late fees. And we could have a default charge applied to overdue invoices. So we might be able to say, hey, here's our invoice. We set the terms. We saw the terms before, like 30 days or something like that. And then possibly have a late fee charge after that at point in time, currently in the beta mode. So they're kind of testing it out. So we'll save that. And then we're going to go to the progress invoicing. So progress invoicing, create multiple partial invoices from a single estimate. We'll keep that on for now. That's going to be the default setting. Then we have the messages. Let's check the messages. Default email message sent with sales forms. So we could set up a default message that's going to be sent with the sales forms, like the invoice and the sales receipt. So the sales form, for example, you can select the invoice. Here's the invoice. And then you could select your email subject line and the email message. So you can kind of automate then the information related to the messaging for your sales receipts with, the people you interact with, of course, you being your customers. So you probably want to make this a custom feel as you go through that messages and go through the default settings for that, and could make it a little bit easier and quicker to process this information. So I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to go to the messages. So let's take a look. Actually, we're on the reminders now. Let's take a look at the reminders. We'll select the pencil for the reminders. So set up invoice reminder emails so we can use the greeting here. And again, we're going to basically set up the custom reminder infields, custom reminder email forms here. So here's the default message, just a reminder that we have not received payment, and so on and so forth. Again, you may want to go in there and basically customize those default settings if you're going to use the reminder messages. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Then we want to go to the online delivery. Let's take a look at the online delivery. We have either the short summary email or full details in the email. I'm going to have the default, which is the full service, the full details, and then we have the PDF attachment as well. And then finally, let's take a look at the statements. So I'm going to go down here and go to the statements. I'll save that, and we'll take a look at the statements down below. And we're going to keep the defaults here, which is to list each transaction in a single line and show aging table at the bottom of the statement. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. Now we're on the expenses tab. So we're then going to go to the expenses tab on the left. So we're going to select the pencil on the right for the bills and expenses. Now we're going to make some changes here from the default. So the default is show item table on expenses and purchase forms. We're going to keep that. And then we have the track expense and items by customer. So we're going to turn that on. Before we do, let's just take a look at one of these items. What we're talking about expenses forms are typically going to be the checks and the bills. So let's take a look at a bill, and then we'll come back here. I'm going to close this back out, and then I'm going to select the plus item. Let's select the plus, and I'm going to go to a bill. So we're going to say we want to add a bill, and here's what that looks like down below. Now I'm going to duplicate the tab up top, and then we're going to go back to the settings. So I'm going to right click on the tab. We're going to duplicate the tab, and so there's going to be our bill. All right, and we're going to be seeing changes to the right hand side over here. So what I'm going to do is close this back out and then go back into our settings. So I'm going to go to the settings up top. We're going to go to the account and settings, and then we're going to go back to the billing or the expenses tab, back into the expenses tab, and then I'm going to select the little pencil up top for the bills and expenses. I'm first going to turn on the track expenses and items by customer, and then say save. And then let's take a look at the bill that we just made on the left hand side. Take a look at the bill. I'm going to generate another one, see if we can adjust this. Closing it back out. Then I'll go to new. We're going to be selecting an add bill now. So we'll add another bill. And then now we have the customer on the right. So we've added basically another field over here. So let's do that again. I'm going to go back to the settings, and I'm going to hit the pencil. And now I'm also going to say make expenses and items billable. So I'm going to add another check there. And here's our billable information. Now this is going to allow us to basically make an item billable so that we can write it as an expense and then basically have that flow over to an invoice that we can use as a line item on the invoice when we create an invoice. So in other words, we might have an expense that we're paying something that we would like to also use to populate our invoice when we bill the client, and therefore we're going to make it billable. So we might have a markup with a default rate for the billable item. So we might say, hey, this is the expense that we paid. We're going to mark it up and then put it on the invoice for some kind of marked up rate. Track billable expenses and items as income. We can do this in a single account or in multiple accounts, and then we have charging sales tax. If we're going to be charging sales tax on that item, I'm going to keep that off. I'm going to say save then, and then we're going to go back to our bill. Let's go back to our bill to the left. Here's what we have now, and then I'm going to close this back out. We're going to keep our eye on this bottom portion as we create a new bill again. Then I'm going to go to add, and then we're going to add another bill. So we're going to add the bill and see the change to it. So now we have the amount, we have the billable, and the customer. So we've added those two items. So you want to change those settings. That's going to be the change that's going to be happening to the bill. I'm going to go back up to the settings up top. Then we're going to go to the purchase order. Let's take a look at the purchase orders. We are going to be using purchase orders. So we're going to be turning on the purchase orders. Now the purchase orders are typically going to be used if we're basically requesting something like inventory and we don't have to pay it at the request. We're requesting inventory. They're going to send it to us, and we want to track that request. So we're going to turn them on. We'll see those in our problem. We're not going to be using any of the custom fields for it. So I'm going to save the defaults here. We're going to say save that. And then we have the message. So I'm going to go down to the tab below, default email message sent with the purchase orders. So purchase orders is going to be another type of thing that we typically would be requesting inventory from a vendor. And so we're contacting somewhere similar to when we had the sales documents. We could set up then the default email related to it. I'm going to save this. I'm going to say save. And then we want to go down to the payments. So now we're going to go to the payments items. And here we have the options, get paid more ways faster, and you can learn more about that information here. You could take credit cards and bank transfers, accept payments through QuickBooks email invoices and mobile. QuickBooks automatically updates when you're paid. So you can take a look at the feature there. We're then going to go to the advanced settings down below. And so we're in the accounting. So we're going to go and take a look at the editing option here. Then we have the first month of the fiscal year. Now the default here is that you're going to be a year in, so 12/31 is the end of the year. So just be careful there. That's the default setting. They're asking for the first month of the fiscal year, which is kind of weird, but they're going to say the first month of the fiscal year is going to be January because you're going to be going January through December. If you have some other fiscal year other than a normal calendar year, then you'd want to go in and change this. Just make sure that you're looking at this the right way, the first month of the fiscal year, to get that populated. That's important, because QuickBooks will then be, closing out the books in certain ways in accordance with whatever your fiscal year is going to be. So make sure if it's not a calendar year, you got it in there properly. We're going to be using the calendar year here. First month of the income tax year, we're going to say once again it's basically a calendar year. So if you have a different fiscal year, then you want to be considering those two items. If not, it'll be the default calendar year. Accounting method, typically you want to keep the accrual method on the accounting method. Even if you're using a cash system, then you still might be entering the information into QuickBooks on more of a cash system than an accrual system, but typically you want to keep the accrual settings. Okay, so I'm gonna recommend that unless you know exactly why you're gonna go to a cash setting within QuickBooks. I'd keep it as accrual, and again, that doesn't stop you from basically entering the data into the QuickBooks system on more of a cash basis, and we'll discuss that a little bit as we go through the practice problem. So close the books. And if we select that, prevents any changes to transactions dated earlier than the close date. Now, this can be really useful because oftentimes, especially if you have multiple users, what you don't want to have happen is after you close the book, someone else goes and changes something in the prior year, like voids a check or deletes a transaction in the prior year, because then, or the prior month, whatever's been closed, month or year, then it doesn't roll over properly. So typically, most people, when they're learning QuickBooks, or if you're a small business, you may not turn that on, but note that it might be really useful as you grow, that you want to basically say, hey, here's the cutoff. We're not doing anything prior to this period. Don't delete anything, and then actually say, hey, I'm not going to let you do anything prior to that period, and turn that feature on. So then we have the company type. Let's go down here. We're going to go to the next pencil icon. And we have the company type, which we already selected, was going to be the sole proprietor. So I'm going to save that. Then we have the chart of accounts. Let's go into the chart of accounts and look at the options there. We have the enable account numbers. Now, account numbers are really useful because they help you to organize the account settings. But however, they're harder to use than you would think. If you don't understand like the ordering of the general ledger accounts, and then you try to apply account numbers, then you may just really mess up the account numbers. I mean, just have them totally out of order, because it's not going to order the accounts by account number first. It's going to first order it typically by the type of account and then account numbers. So you just, before you do that, we're thinking about putting a course together just on, account numbers. You want to think about how the account numbers work. If you know how account numbers work, then this could be a useful setting. The default is to have it off, however, and this is how we're going to start it here. And if you have it off, it'll still order it in terms of the chart of accounts, but then you won't have the ability to give further orderings with regards to inside a particular account type. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we look at the chart of accounts. And then we then have the tips account. We're going to keep that as is. Then we have the billable expense income account. In other words, this is going to be that item when we said that we made a bill. If we make a bill or a check, and then we say that's going to be billable, in other words, we paid for something, but we want to include it in the invoice as part of the invoicing process, then when it pulls in over to the invoice, it has to be added to some kind of income item as an invoicing item. So we paid the bill, expense item, but we said it was billable, so we want to pull it over to the invoice. We make the invoice, then it's going to be assigned to the income item of the billable expense as we charge our client for it. So we're going to keep that as the default. We're going to save. Then we're going to go to the categories, and I'm going to select the pencil to the right here where we have class tracking. So the class tracking is going to be kind of a more advanced feature or specialized feature that's really useful in certain circumstances. We're not going to be using the class tracking feature here. We're going to keep that off. And then we have the location. So track the location, adds a location field on forms so you can assign transactions to different locations like stores, sales regions, and countries. Again, we're going to keep that off. That's going to be more of a specialized information. We're going to keep the default settings as is at this point. Then we have the automation. So we're going to select the pencil on the automation. First, it says we want to pre-fill forms with previously entered content. This is really useful to have on. We'll keep the default setting. For example, if you're going to enter bills from year to year and you paid the utility bill 1 year to, like, say, Verizon or something, or 1 month, and then next month when you put in Verizon, it's going to populate that information for you, so it'll already pick up the account that you hit last time and everything. That's really useful. And then you just need to change the amount. So we want that on so it'll automatically help us populate our information as we go. Then we have automatically apply credits. So automatically apply credits to the next invoice you create for the same customer. So in other words, if the customer has some kind of overpayment for some reason and you create another invoice, it's going to take that overpayment and try to apply it to the next invoice that you make, which is a logical thing to happen. We'll keep the default setting. Automatically invoice unbilled activity. Automatically create invoices for customers with activities. Notifications appear in the activity feed page. I'm going to keep the default as off for that. And then we have the automatically apply bill payments. So that's going to be when you add bill payments to the register, the setting automatically applies the payment to the oldest existing bill. Most companies turn on this setting. We're going to keep the default as on. Next, we have the projects. So we're going to edit and look at the projects. We're going to keep the default setting, organize all job-related activities in one place. So we're going to save that. And then we have the user view. And if we go into the activity for the user view, you're viewing QuickBooks in the business view. We're going to keep that as the default setting as opposed to the accountant view at this time. We're going to go ahead and save that. Then we have the time tracking. We'll take a look at the options related to the time tracking. We have the add service field on timesheets. We're going to keep the default setting here, which is to make single time activity billable to customers. We're going to keep that as the default setting. I'm then going to cancel this because we didn't make any changes. And then we have the currency. I'm going to see the default for the currency. The home currency, we're going to be working with the United States dollar for the example problem here. But here's where you would change the currency as well if you'd like to do so, if you need to do so. And then, of course, we could have the multiple currencies. This could add a level of complication to the problem, however. We're not going to be using multiple currencies in this practice problem. That might be a specialty field that we may look into at a future time. We're going to then close this up. I'm going to cancel this, keeping the default settings. Then we have the other preferences. Going into the other preferences, we have the date format. So you may want to change the date format to whatever the customary format is that you're working with. Note, we have the default, the month, the day, and then the year. If you're saving reports and things like that, sometimes it's useful to have basically the year and then the month and then the day, because then it'll save by year first if you're looking at it in order as a saved information. So this is actually a useful format to have basically for saving the reports. Then the number format is going to be in this format. So it's going to have the comma. And again, this just depends on where you're located typically. If you want the decimal here, so you can take a look at the number format if you need to change that. And then we have the customer label. Warn if duplicate check number is used. This is a really good warning to have because the check numbers will be pre-numbered. So if you use the same check number, it'll basically tell you that. And that's going to be one of your internal controls you have against, problems with lost checks or some kind of fraud or something happening in that format. Warn if duplicate bill numbers is used. I'm going to keep the default as off. Warn if duplicate journal entry number is used. I'm going to keep the default as off there. Notice the bills and the journal entries are internal resources, whereas the check would be external checks that you would then put into the printer in that format. And then sign me out if inactive for, and you could set the time frame to be how long the computer's on. Anytime you leave the computer, you probably want to sign off. You should be signing off on the computer. But if you're going somewhere for a short time and coming back, then you might have the computer on. This will say how long you're going to be basically logged in. It's going to log you out after an hour. All right, so we're going to save those settings and say done down below.